Alright everyone, time to look at the upcoming Lore Master rework. So I'm currently at my home in the game and I'm on my Lore Master character. And of course, as some people might know, we have a brand new forum post from Mahal, the dev that seems to be in charge of the Lore Master changes that are coming. We have this whole forum post talking about some changes coming up for the Lore Master. And in this video, I'm going to go through this post and kind of look at the Lore Master at the same time. And we'll kind of get a feel for the changes. And I will, of course, let you know my thoughts on what I think of the changes. If I think they're good, if I think they're bad, or if I think they're okay. So with that out of the way, let's get into the video. So we're just going to start from the top. Mahal writes, I want to say first a huge thank you to everyone who posted on the original forum thread, as well as the follow-up thread on the new forums regarding the Lore Master class as it is right now. I started typing out replies to most of those posts late last week and quickly realized that following through would essentially amount to discussing every part of the class as well as my current inclination toward future changes. So rather than split out my commentary across many posts, I went ahead and did my best to consolidate those replies into a single response. Hopefully this both answers many of your concerns with the current aspects of the class, as well as satisfy many of you who are primarily interested in what we're thinking about when considering the future of the class. As a note, consider what follows to be collected responses, thoughts, and inclinations. This is not a complete and comprehensive list of changes lined up for the class. I just feel it's more valuable to see all of my responses and thoughts on specific skills, traits, interactions, etc. in a single place so they can contextualize one another to a degree. So what we're going to see in this video and this forum post is not like set in stone changes, but rather on Mahal's thoughts based on feedback and discussions with the players. So let's see what On Mahal has come up with. On trait specializations. What is the current thinking about the 3 LM lines? So before we look at that post, we're just going to look at the lines that we have as a Lore Master. And of course, the most played, at least in instances, Yellow Lore Master, really strong support, really fun to play to try to support your group as well as you can, where you offer some Water Lore and some Beacon of Hope healing as well. You have Red Line, which is basically the DPS line for Lore Master. The Red Line, as far as I know, is pretty good, but all other DPS classes are just better than the Red LM. Red Lore Master is also a lot of inductions, so it can feel a bit slow, but the LM can hit pretty hard, so at least for landscape they're doing quite well if you have decent stats. And the final line that I feel like is a bit out of place is the blue line, the so-called pet line. It's certainly not a bad line, but I think yellow is just better in general, but blue line has some nice utility, your pets are better, and of course you have the Crow Thieves, a murder of crows, which is kind of like a mini Oathbreaker Shame on the target with a 2-minute cooldown. So it's certainly viable in some situations, but just overall, yellow is just so much better for supporting the group. If I were to make this decision, I would actually make blue a utility line, where yellow and red would take from blue. But let's see what On Mahal has to say about the trait lines. Originally, my inclination was towards blue becoming a passive tree. So exactly what I said, this was his original thoughts. Mostly because it is a mix of offensive and defensive traits, and the traits which just make your pet a little bit better don't really impact your core role so much as moderately improve an essential part of the class. So this is kind of correct. Most of the blue line traits buff your pet or buff yourself. It's kind of already kind of like a utility line in a way, but it is what it is. That said, I think it's worth seriously considering how blue LM might become a viable alternative to red captain in groups. If going down that road, the red LM would be direct personal DPS, blue would be offensive group support with a little less damage, and yellow would be defensive group support and off healing. What he's saying here is that he's kind of thinking about making red LM, of course, as it already kind of is, direct personal DPS. Blue would be offensive group support with a little less damage, so kind of like the red captain. I mean, you already have the Murder of Crows skill, so it's kind of an offensive support already. But he will probably gain some more stuff if they decide to go this route with the blue LM. And yellow would be defensive group support and off healing. So I'm not quite sure how I feel about that. Yellow is already... I mean, yeah, it is defensive group support and there is some off healing. But yellow LM is also offensive group support. It just covers all the bases and it's really fun. It's a really fun and engaging role to play. And I actually quite do enjoy playing yellow LM. You can have so much impact on the fight. And you really notice if the LM is slacking, you can really feel it in the group. The most difficult aspect of keeping both blue and yellow as specializations is, ironically, keeping them separate and distinct from one another. Yeah, that's true. Right now they're both really similar. There's not a lot of differences between the lines. Because players are able to, or have to really acquire so many traits in a non-spec tree, you run the risk of players deciding one capstone or specialization bonus trait is too valuable to skip, but otherwise grabbing all the necessary traits out of blue and yellow, basically treating one of them as a passive tree anyway. So if you just take a look at my trait tree in the current LM, my yellow LM, let's be honest, if we look at the bottom, we have Ancient Master. Of course, it's useful, but not absolutely needed. And the other capstone is Enfeeble. And this is like the core reason that you pick yellow LM, I would say. Of course, there's some nice set bonuses like Warding Lore and Air Lore and Herb Lore. But mainly yellow is so strong because of Enfeeble, and Ancient Master is really good utility. And if you were to pick blue, then you have Feral, which buffs your pets, but that's like meh. And you have the Murder of Crows incoming damage buff for 15 seconds. Kind of like the mini Oathbreaker Shame. But just in general, I think yellow is much better. And like on Mac Mahal said, I take the things that I want in yellow, and then I pretty much think of the blue line as a utility line. As you can see, I'm getting the stuff that I want. A lot of it is skill inductions. There's of course Catmint, which is really good. I'm getting Inner Flame for the heals. And deeper down there's more skill inductions, so kind of just getting the buffs that we want from blue. And then everything that's necessary in yellow line. Same thing goes for blue line. You would kind of just pick the necessary things in blue, get Murder of Crows. Then you would go down yellow, get the Allures. You would get the Ancient Craft. And basically anything that's useful in yellow. So you're basically flipping the script if you're going blue and then going down into yellow. Now, blue line as an alternative to a red captain is not a decision set in stone, but I can say with certainty that red line should be a competent, competitive DPS specialization, and that yellow line will remain a fully fledged support specialization. Alright, 2 pluses here. Yellow line being a support specialization, good. Yellow should keep its identity. Red line should be competitive DPS. This is true. Every red line should be somewhat competitive. So I think red LM could certainly see some changes and some buffs. But I'm a little bit unsure about the blue line as an alternative to red captain. The red captain role is being, like, the red captain fills that role so well. Deals good DPS and the buffs feels really nice. But if you're gonna do this alternative to a red captain, then blue line would have to offer way more than it does, of course. It would have to see a big rework and offer way more group support and buffs that it's currently doing. But I really find it hard to imagine that you would ever bring a blue LM over a red captain, where you get Telling Mark, you get Master of War, Oathbreaker's Shame. There's so much good stuff from the red captain, as well as good DPS nowadays. So far I'm on board. Yellow should remain support, red should be competitive DPS. I'm a little bit unsure about the blue Lore Master being a support. Honestly, I would much rather see a blue LM just turn into a utility line, and we can have red LM dealing good DPS, and yellow line being good support as Lore Master. I think Lore Master will be just fine filling the DPS slot and the support slot, but not the offensive support slot such as a red captain. And next column we have pets. We're talking about pets. So before we go into that, we're going to look at the current state of pets. So if I summon my training dummy here, how do pets currently work on Lore Master? So Lore Master, basically you have 4 pets, as you can see in my bars down here, that kind of do something. And if we summon out the Raven, what's the reason for the Raven? It's of course the benediction of the Raven, 10% fire mitigation, and if you use Catmint it turns into 20%. So Raven is mainly used Catmint and benediction to give that really strong fire mitigation debuff on the target. And you also have the quite useful distraction, reducing range damage but also bringing in ranged mobs if they're far away and shooting from range. If you use distraction on those mobs, they will start running into melee range. So also another really useful part of the Raven is the distraction. The next pet we have is the friend of nature, the bog lurker. The main reason for the bog lurker is of course the root strike incoming ranged critical chance 5%. So when you attack with your pet, it uses the range skill, and you get another strong buff for hunters, 5% incoming crit chance for every hunter. You have your bear pet, which is incoming melee and range damage with your shadow arms. So these buffs last for 30 seconds, both root strike and shadow arms. And the Raven mitigation debuff is 1 minute. And the final pet, which has actually a long cooldown, a 3-minute cooldown, is the commune with nature, putting the reflect heal on the targets. Return 5% of damage as healing, or if you use the Catmint, you return 10% of damage as healing. So those 3 and also the Spirit Pet are the part of your core pet rotation currently as LM. So a big thing that good Lore Masters will do, they will get their pet buffs up really quickly. Raven, Bear, and of course the Bog Lurker. So a good LM, you'll typically see these up within 5 seconds, 5 to 10 seconds. All these buffs will be up if they're needed, depending on your comp in the group. And if there's multiple targets, of course, a Raven Benediction is AoE, but the best LMs will just keep resummoning Shatter Arms on that target, new target, Shatter Arms on that target, because the cooldown resets on the skills when you use it, so you resummon, and you put Bear on next target, and you might even do Bog Lurker on the other targets. So there's a lot of min-maxing to the pets currently as a Lore Master, where the best LMs will maximize to get as many pets on the targets as they can, and it's a really good skill gap test for Lore Masters to see if you can actually perform at a high level or if you can't. You'll find some Lore Masters who don't really do pets at all. It's probably just a lack of knowledge, but the best Lore Masters will put pets up quickly and as many targets as possible. So that's currently how pets work on Lore Master. So let's see what Autumn is saying about pets. From the old forum about what if your pets no longer had debuff applying skills, but you had a single debuff skill on your bar which changed depending on your active pet. Essentially a dynamic lore skill with higher uptime than cooldown, which allowed you to apply multiple debuffs via either pet cycling or target cycling. Would like to hear more about this solution. The basic idea is to have the skill effect governed by your current pet while being a regular skill on your skill bar, so not your pet's skill bar. Imagine you have a Raven out and a skill on your own bar that applies 5% incoming tactical damage for 1 minute with a 20-second cooldown. Missing your Raven and summoning a Lynx changes that skill to apply 5% physical mitigations for 1 minute, but does not reset the existing cooldown. Now, every 20 seconds, your choice would be applying your existing pet debuff to a new target, or swapping to a different pet to get a different debuff rolling on your current target. It would maintain some of the activity that currently comprises the pet rotation, while giving you more potential action in a single target encounter, while reducing the amount you're able to or have to rapidly cycle through pets at a speed of light in multi-target encounters. Basically what Onmak Mahal is suggesting here is, instead of having unique skills for your pets, like my bear has 3 different skills, then instead we would have a player skill. So let's treat Airlore as the, let's say this is the pet debuff skill. This would have a 20-second cooldown, and it would change depending on the pet you summon. So in his example, he said you have Raven out, skill would change to -5% tactical damage. So the Raven would be your tactical damage debuff pet. And then he said your Lynx would be the physical mitigation debuff pet. So if I had a lot of physical classes in my group, obviously I wouldn't debuff the tactical mitigations, but instead I would get my Lynx pet out and use, let's say the bear is the Lynx. I would get the Lynx pet out and pop the, he said 1 minute duration debuffs. So the debuffs last for a minute, cooldown is 20, which means that I would then get my Lynx pet out. I would pop this skill, it goes on a cooldown for 20 seconds, but the target is debuffed for 1 minute with the physical mitigations, and when the skill comes off cooldown 20 seconds later, I can then choose to apply the same skill to a different target if I still have my same pet out, or I could summon a different pet and even apply a different debuff to the same target. So it's definitely going to slow down your pet rotations, like boom, 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 pet rotation. But instead, it seems like you're going to have to think about it more and decide, is it worth to use this on this target or not? Should I save it? So that's the suggested changes we have so far for pets. The next paragraph is about pet cooldowns. Yes, it is exceedingly likely that pet skills will have cooldowns in the future. For a peek into what those cooldowns might look like, Captain Heralds and Archer are a decent starting point. This means each type of pet would have a cooldown, so all your bear summons would share a cooldown, and all of your saber cat summons would share a cooldown. With the total number of pets a lore master has at their disposal, you should never be left totally petless with all your friends on cooldown. Why is this necessary? Frankly, we don't have a practical workaround to the fact that resummoning a pet fundamentally creates a new creature entity and completely obliterates all data associated with the pet you just dismissed. Crucially, this means health and cooldowns are always fully reset. We could technically leave pets without cooldowns, but that would necessitate counterbalancing their skills with the assumption that every pet skill has a roughly 2-second cooldown, so we'd have to significantly nerf many pet skills, and that would feel quite antithetical to the core fantasy of the class design. And to reiterate a response to another concern about pet cooldowns, it is likely that we'll add a reasonable cooldown, say 15 seconds, to the return to master skill, while making it usable in combat. So if you summon a pet in the heat of combat and it decides to arrive inside a nearby rock or caught on a corner of something somewhere, you should still be able to click that skill to bring the pet out of its stuck state, even though you're in combat. So, the talk about cooldowns. So, let's imagine. He talked about captains being a good baseline, and captain pets currently, I believe, have a 2-minute cooldown. This would mean that my Raven would have a 2-minute cooldown, my Boglurker would have a 2-minute cooldown, and my Bear would have a 2-minute cooldown. Basically, every type of pet would have a 2-minute cooldown, but your skill on your bar would have a 20-second cooldown to be used. So technically, what I could be doing, I could get a debuff up every 20 seconds. I could summon my Raven, it goes on a 2-minute cooldown. I could apply my debuff, and then 20 seconds later, when the skill comes off cooldown, I would then get my Boglurker out. I could apply the debuff, it goes on cooldown. 20 seconds later, I apply my Bear. So if you're only fighting one target, You definitely want to summon your pet every 20 seconds to get as many different debuffs as possible. So all the pets would have a 2-minute cooldowns. So if you use the Raven pet and then use its buff, it will then be 2 minutes later where you could apply the Raven again if you choose to do that. So you would have to be a lot more thoughtful about when applying the pet debuffs and which type of buffs you do. But basically, it seems like the thought of Loremaster is that the spam pet applying is going away. If you're fighting like 10 mobs, no longer will you see a Loremaster summon the bear, apply Shatter Arms to one target, resummon bear, apply to another target, resummon another target. But instead, Loremaster will be doing other things, but of course, you will apply some sort of debuff on a target, and then 20 seconds later, it's time for pets again. Basically, instead of the summon pet, apply debuff, summon pet, apply debuff playstyle, instead what we're gonna get is, alright, which pet should I apply first? Alright, this pet. Alright, use my debuff applying skill, boom, 20-second cooldown on that skill. Okay, I do other things for 15 seconds, blah blah blah, ancient craft, lores, do some healing. Okay, my skill is coming off cooldown. I should apply my bear debuff next. Bear is up. Okay, apply the skill. Alright, I have another 15 seconds of doing some other stuff. Blah blah blah, lores and stuff, do some healing, maybe do some damage. We don't really know until the rework is complete. Alright, the skill is coming off cooldown. Alright, I'm gonna do the bear pet this time on this target. Okay, boom, boom. Okay, another 15 to 20 seconds of other stuff. And basically then, instead of the rapid pet boo 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 apply, the pet debuff would then come into play every 20 seconds because your skill to apply a debuff would be on a 20-second cooldown. So the pet rotation would slow down. Every 20 seconds or so, if you choose to do that, you would summon a new pet, or you keep the same pet and just apply that same debuff to multiple targets. It's certainly going to slow down the pet rotation, but instead you're going to have to think and consider more when to apply the debuffs and which debuffs to apply. On the next section we have pet identities. So what are all the pets, the different pets going to be? So let's start going through them. Lynx pet. The Lynx would be focused on single target damage and would be further improved by redline traits. The Lynx need to be less reliant on its from out of combat stealth opener, and its damage should be brought up across the board. So kind of like this, giving pets more identity, that's a good idea in my opinion. And it seems like the idea for Lynx is for the Lynx to be a redline pet, dealing single target damage, helping your DPS on targets. Saber Cat. The Saber Cat would be focused on melee AoE and would be improved by redline traits. The Saber Cat needs to be hardier and deal much more damage. Changes to mitigation reductions should allow it to benefit from other mitigation debuffs rather than being sequestered to a corner with the only frost mitigation debuff available to players. So another good idea here, Lynx will be your single target pet in redline, Saber Cat will be your AoE damage pet in redline. So having different options on the pets sounds interesting. Bog Guardian. The Bog Guardian would be weaker than both Lynx and Saber Cat in terms of raw output, but would have the benefit of range and would also benefit from redline traits. So Bog Guardian would then be a redline ranged pet. So the current idea he has for pet identities: Lynx single target redline, Saber Cat AoE redline, Bog Guardian ranged damage redline. A little bit weaker DPS, but can fight from range. Next up we have Raven. The Raven would be a balanced utility choice and would benefit from blue line traits. The Raven should still be a valuable pet to have by your side, but we can hopefully mitigate its currently dominant value by removing Benediction of the Raven and by bringing up several other pets towards the value Ravens currently provide. And of course, if you're going to do this rework to the pets, then you need to take away the mitigation buff from Ravens. And it seems like the thought is that the Raven is going to be a support pet from blue line. Eagle pet. The eagle would once again be available to all lore masters and would also be improved by blue line traits. When summoned, it would grant your group the motivated morale buff. So another blue line focused pet will be the eagle, and when you summon the eagle you get motivated, which is the captain motivating speech. I'm not sure how I feel about just copying a skill from another class, and if you summon the eagle, will it give you the 20-minute duration motivated or just a passive motivated morale buff? If you're gonna do this, I think you should make it so that summoning the eagle, actually it's probably gonna be a passive, but I think it should be a 20-minute duration if you're doing this. Because if you're gonna rely on your eagle for the motivated buff, and let's say you're doing a 6-man and you don't have a captain in the group, I don't think it's a good idea for motivated to just be passive, because if the eagle dies you lose motivated, which is a huge debuff to the group. But if you're gonna do this, it needs to be a 20-minute duration in my opinion. But I'm not sure how I feel about just copying the motivated, but it is what it is. Alright, Spirit Pet. The Spirit Pet would remain a totally defensive healing oriented pet. Its flank granting skill probably needs to be less restrictive. So the Spirit Pet will basically stay a healing pet as it kind of currently is. Bear. The bear would be the pet with the strongest inherent defense and would retain its taunt. With the pet cooldowns discussed above, we're hopeful we can return the ability to use bear taunt inside instances, since you won't be able to spam and summon the bear repeatedly in order to use the bear taunt more frequently than intended. So what he's talking about here is something that used to be a thing, where you summon your bear has a force taunt, roaring challenge. You were able to use that on bosses. You would just summon your bear and go to range, taunt the boss. When the boss came over, it would hit the bear maybe once or twice, the bear would die, boss will start running back to the tank, but by that time you already summoned your pet out and you taunt. So basically you were able to ping pong the boss back and forth all the time, and that made it so that the bear taunt was disabled in instances, so you couldn't taunt the bosses with your bear. But if pet cooldowns are going to a 2-minute cooldown, then there shouldn't be a problem with the bear having a taunt, and I don't see any problems with that. So basically what Almak Mahal is suggesting here is the pet identities will be Lynx, Sabercat, and Bog Guardian will be DPS focused, single target Lynx, AoE damage Sabercat, and ranged Bog Guardian. Raven will be a balanced utility pet. Eagle will also be a utility pet and also give the motivated morale buff. Spirit Pet will stay a healing pet, and Bear would then be a tanking pet. That seems to be the idea. And just from looking at this, I would expect the useful pets to be either Eagle for the motivated morale buff, Spirit for healing, or any of the DPS ones for some more damage for your group. And of course, the added functionality to them having their own unique pet debuffing skill that you could use with your pet debuff skill on your bar would also change how useful the pets are. If Lynx, as it was suggested, gives physical mitigation debuff, and if the Raven gives tactical mitigation debuff, that would make you have to rotate your pets a bit depending on the debuffs that they provide. But overall, for usability, just from their identity, it seems like the DPS pets are the way you want to go, or the Spirit for healing. Pet skills and damage. Alright, so here we get some information about how strong the pets will be. Let's have a look. Lynx, 100k single target melee DPS, roughly 40% mits. I'm just kind of going to skip the mits part, but obviously the bear will have a lot of mits, and the redline pets will have less mits. But let's look at what they can offer. So the idea is that the Lynx will deal about 100k single target melee DPS. Okay, pretty good single target melee DPS. Sabercat will deal about 150k AoE DPS with 3 targets. So basically 50k DPS to those targets. I honestly just see the Lynx pet being just better if it only gives 150k AoE on 3 targets. If you raise this up to like 250k, then I would consider it for 3 targets. but for now Lynx seems to be the strongest pet to have summoned. Bog Guardian deals roughly 80k single target range DPS. Alright, that's definitely a viable option. Less chance to die if you stay at range, so it will be a good option to the Lynx. Eagle deals 70k single target melee DPS, so depending on that motivated buff, how it works, the Eagle is definitely also a solid choice, also being a bit sturdier than the other pets. Raven and Bear deal low single target DPS. Unless their debuffs are really good, then I don't see a reason to use Raven and Bear. Maybe Bear if you want to get a taunt in there but to do some tanking, but I do not see a reason for the Raven, honestly. Of course, it all depends on their debuff skills, what they do, but to me, Lynx seems to be the best choice. Get some extra DPS on the target, with the Bog Guardian being a decent other option. And I kinda like the Eagle if it has the motivated buff. Alright, time to move on from pets. Let's talk about inductions. As with the Minstrel last year, it is likely that LM traits in the future will give class-specific induction bonuses, but that the baseline skill inductions will be reduced as well. At the moment, there's a wide gulf between players with regular inductions, which you feel especially hard in the early game, and players with lots of induction bonuses stacked up, which can practically nullify inductions entirely at the top end, not to mention players who have actually hit minus 100% induction duration and found that it can break your character's skill animations entirely. As you can see on my legendary item, I have the skill induction speed Word of Power, and at the bottom I have the 2 Word of Craft focus, reducing my skill inductions even more. And of course, in the traits, there's traits that reduce your skill inductions, synchronized movement 9%. We have prepared materials 15%, basically making like my pet summoning's cooldowns. They're super fast, 0.4, 0.4, look at this, boom, they summon so fast. The guitar, fast, warding knowledge, fast, like all my inductions are super fast. If I were to take off my allies, and if I didn't have these traits, you can see how the induction increases. Without my allies, inductions on pets doubled, 0.8 seconds. So the allies, all the induction buffs are really powerful and helping even your healing inductions are faster, making you heal faster. Warlord is basically instant, but I think Loremaster should be fast, so hopefully they'll find a good balance between this. Skill animations. At this time, we're not planning to significantly overhaul the feel of the class's playstyle. The idea being that Loremasters remain the slow and steady induction class, but capable of significant output if left unimpeded. That said, we will endeavor to clean up any post-skill delay or self-roots where skill appears to be completely finished, yet you're still unable to begin your next action. Every class should have, let's say, fast animations, and after a skill is applied, you should be able to go into your next animation instead of an animation playing after the skill is applied. The posts below this do not specifically address every single lackluster trait. I welcome any additional commentary about specific traits that bug you or are viewed as never worth it in any circumstance, but you'll have to wait a bit for a more comprehensive, complete revision outline in the future if you're interested in a proposal that covers every single trait. So now it's time to actually look at some of the skills. Let's see. First skill, Dispel Corruption. So if we look at the Loremaster, Dispel Corruption, currently 25-second cooldown, removes 1 tier of up to 3 different corruption effects from the target. So pluses to this skill, it's ranged, it removes sometimes 3 corruptions on your target, which is really nice, but cooldown is really long, 25 seconds. That's a big minus. So Unmark Mahal says about Dispel Corruption, Dispel Corruption has fallen quite far behind most other classes over the years. Loremasters with their strong identity as a support class seem like they ought to have a much more flexible corruption removal. I propose making this skill dynamic depending on your pet, where the skill remains a player activated skill on your own skill bar, but changes it affects depending on your active pet. Basically, what Almanac Mahali's suggestion with the Dispel Corruption is to make this its own skill that changes depending on the pet you have summoned. So if I were to summon the Raven, it would be some effect, and if I changed the pet, it would change the effect. So let's look at what the effects would be. The bear pet would remove 1 corruption from your target with a 7-second cooldown. All the birds would remove 3 different corruptions from your target's 15-second cooldown. Cats would remove 2 different corruptions from several targets in a small AoE, 20-second cooldown. Bog Guardian remove 1 corruption from several targets in a large AoE, 20-second cooldown. Spirit would remove 1 corruption from your target and restore morale if a corruption is removed, 15-second cooldown. I'm kind of liking this. This gives a lot more utility to the corruption removal. Especially I can see the Bog Guardian be really useful, removing 1 from a lot of targets. If you think about the current raid, this could be really useful for the current raid. 1 corruption from all targets in a large AoE would be really nice. And having the bear pet being a reliable corruption removal every 7 seconds. So I'm quite behind this idea about the pets being your corruption removals. So pretty good idea in my opinion. Knowledge of Cures. Let's look at Knowledge of Cures. Knowledge of Cures. Currently, I guess in yellow line it has no induction. But if you don't have the improved Knowledge of Cures, if you're not in yellow line, it has an induction and you have to stand still. So Onum is suggesting that the baseline version of Knowledge of Cures will lose its induction and should be usable on the move, basically making the functionality of improved Knowledge of Cures the baseline skill instead. So no induction and you can use it on the move is the suggested change. Good change in my opinion. Alright, Blinding Flash. Let's look at Blinding Flash. So currently Blinding Flash is a long-range immediate tactical skill which can interrupt inductions. It's a 35-second daze and a 15-second cooldown. So this skill actually has some travel time, so if you're far away it's going to take a while before it applies. The Blinding Flash, you kind of throw a flash of light on the target and it's dazed for 35 seconds, and a 15-second cooldown gives you the ability to keep several targets enmeshed. Let's see what Onum says about Blinding Flash. Blinding Flash will likely lose its interrupt flag. If so, the interrupt component would probably pass to either Light of the Rising Dawn, which would no longer have an induction. Blinding Flash may also gain a significant cooldown, plus 45 seconds or so when traded red or blue. Okay, this all makes sense. Blinding Flash is currently one of your main interrupt skills, and it would instead lose the interrupt. And if you're playing red or blue LM, the cooldown would be longer. This would basically make Blinding Flash, instead of your interrupt, it would make it a core CC tool for you to mess different targets. And he suggested that Light of the Rising Dawn might get the interrupt tag on it with no induction on it. So that would make Light of the Rising Dawn like an instant skill when you cast it, and instead of just being a stun, which is what it currently is, you would then be an interrupt skill as well, interrupting inductions. Next up we have Wizard's Frost, Wizard's Fire, and Wizard's Lightning. Consider this very speculative, since it includes Wizard's Lightning here in this list. Nominally at least, I'm curious about how folks would feel about these 3 skills being baseline to the class, while gaining effects, targets, etc. from your specialization trees. The core elements they would retain and share are easy access to fire, frost, and lightning damage to proc out in the cold, or playing with the fire effects, and the ability to consume pet flanks for different effects. Fire would be a power and damage buff, frost would be morale, lightning would be cooldown reductions. So I'm gonna be honest, I don't really use these skills much. Wizard Frost, Wizard's Fire, and Wizard's Lightning. To me they're currently kind of meh. Don't really need them. The only time I use Wizard's Fire is if I'm doing deeds on my LM, just to kill targets fast. but it seems like Unlock Mahal has some ideas to make them useful, but we'll see when the full rework is in. Sticky Tar. So Sticky Tar, let's have a look at Sticky Tar. Sticky Tar is currently a minute 30 cooldown, and it remains for a minute on the ground, so a 30-second downtime. When you throw Sticky Tar on the ground, ahead of you a big square will be covered with the Sticky Tar, and the Sticky Tar debuff is minus 10% fire mitigation and minus 50% movement speed. So another important debuffing tool for Loremaster. Unlock Mahal says Tar likely changes from minus 10% fire mitigations to minus 10% tactical mitigations. Uptime may be reduced slightly, though the mid shred is the more important part of the skill. The slow doesn't need to be so tightly controlled. As a note, Benediction of Raven and Catmint are also likely to change, with the overall effect being to mitigate the LM's and RK's over-reliance on Tar and Catmint Raven to achieve DPS viability. Okay, this currently RK and Loremaster are way too reliant on the Benediction of the Raven and the Sticky Tar debuffs, so you'll really feel that as a rune-keeper DPS, a fire rune-keeper DPS, if your Loremaster is not keeping up Benediction or Catmint, or even for hunters, you'll feel that. So removing the reliance on this and instead compensating RK DPS and Loremaster DPS would be a welcome change. So what he's saying here is, instead of being a fire mitigation debuff, it would instead be a tactical mitigation debuff, and the uptime might be slightly reduced. Ancient Craft. Ancient Craft likely changes from an armor rating debuff to 10/15% physical mitigations. Uptime might be reduced slightly. So his plan is to change the current state of Ancient Craft from being a raw armor value and instead have it be a physical mitigation debuff. So it basically seems like he wants to change Ancient Craft and Sticky Tar. Ancient Craft will be your physical mit debuff tool, Sticky Tar will be your tactical mitigation debuff tool. Instead of giving raw armor value or fire mitigations, it will then instead debuff the physical mitigations or the tactical mitigations with some reduced uptime. If he's gonna do that, hopefully he changes the Sticky Tar animation, because Ancient Craft is really easy to throw on a target. You can just take a look. It'll be a nice buff for the physical classes. Ancient Craft is just boom, it's on. And Sticky Tar is, yep, let me throw this, there we go. Actually it's pretty fast if you have the induction and stuff, but maybe Sticky Tar should be instant like Ancient Craft. And maybe it should apply to the targets, kind of like Ancient Craft, because Ancient Craft you can throw on the targets, while Sticky Tar you have to throw on the ground. Maybe you can have Sticky Tar being thrown just like AC onto the targets, making it equal for physical and tactical DPS. So you don't have to stay in the square for your tactical DPS to be improved. Burning Embers. It's exceedingly likely that the dots for every tier of this skill will be changed to allow partial pulses, meaning that upgrading and downgrading the tier would not result in any lost pulses. Unfortunately, partial pulses cannot crit, but a partial non-crit pulse should always be more valuable to you than losing that pulse completely. I'm not overly concerned about that. So he's talking about the Burning Ember skill, which is a damage over time skill that you apply to your targets, and when he's saying that if you tier it up or tier it down, you will not lose like all the dots. They will still be there as partial dots, making Burning Embers more useful than it currently is. Cracked Earth. So let's look at Cracked Earth. What is Cracked Earth currently doing? Cracked Earth is AoE target with a 7-meter radius. It deals fire damage, but after 3 seconds it applies a root to your targets. The Cracked Earth next to Herblore is one of your rooting tools, dealing damage and then rooting the targets after a few seconds. What does Unlock Mahal say about Cracked Earth? Cracked Earth probably needs to be split out in 2 variants. A base version with higher damage but no root, and an alternative you can trade into in the yellow tree that reduces its damage but adds the root countdown, basically making it the skill it currently is. So basically right now it is a damaging skill but applying the root after a few seconds, And a suggested change is to have a trait where if you don't trait it, cracked earth just deal high damage, but if you trait the root, you basically get no damage, but the root applies after a few seconds. Gust of Wind. Gust of Wind needs a firm baseline damage increase. Being divorced from Pleasant Breeze, this skill only has a place in your damage rotation, and as such, it should contribute a non-insignificant amount of damage. So, Gust of Wind getting a damage buff. Knowledge of the Lore Master. Knowledge of the Lore Master at a minimum needs its in-combat and out-of-combat effects switched. The monster debuff should be applied by using the skill in combat rather than out of combat. As a single target skill with a significant cooldown, it should also have a much more impactful effect than lowering resistance ratings on the targets. Even if the debuff retains its 1 minute duration, it could probably stand to have something like a small incoming damage or crit defense reduction component. So Knowledge of the Lore Master currently has a 100% uptime, the duration is 1 minute, cooldown is 1 minute, and it basically just reduces resist rating. This skill can only be used out of combat, which makes it like kind of useless. You would only throw it on the target before the fight starts, but it's like nothing 100k on resist ratings. And of course you can also use this to see the weaknesses and strengths of the creatures, if like you examine them and see their strength and weaknesses. On Mahal is suggesting that this skill gets changed to work in combat, and that the resist rating is not the buff we're gonna have, and instead it's maybe gonna have an incoming damage component to it or reducing crit defense. So this skill definitely could see a buff, so good thinking by On Mahal here. The next skill On Mahal is talking about is Sign of Power Vigilance. Currently, it applies a +3 stealth detection in a radius of 25 meters. Basically, if there's stealthed enemies nearby, it's easier for you to see them. On Mahal says that the baseline value on this skill's stealth detection is a little low, especially given what niche value stealth detection has. The stealth detection bonus should be increased, and the skill should probably be given a secondary effect, like reducing the chance incoming damage is critical, or reducing incoming critical magnitude for a brief window. So I agree, this skill definitely needs to change a bit. Currently it's basically useless. The next skill he's talking about is Sign of Power Command. Currently it's a max 9 target 10 meter radius skill that you can apply to a bunch of mobs, which basically reduces their parry chance and attack duration. On Mahal says, Sign of Power Command is pretty lackluster and would be more compelling if its attack speed debuff were replaced by the crit chance reduction from Sign of Power See All Ends. Even with that, it may need a trait to make it AoE, and along with a small cooldown increase to make it more comfortable to use regularly, but not constantly. So another change that I agree with, this skill could also see a change to what its effects are, and currently it has a really short cooldown, and increasing the cooldown would be fine, so you don't use it all the time, but rather when you need it. Sign of Power See All Ends is the next skill we're going to talk about. Currently it reduces an enemy's abilities to score a critical hit on your target. So Sign of Power See All Ends. He believes that Sign of Power See All End is a good candidate for becoming a player buff rather than a monster debuff. I agree. Good thinking. Consider the possibility of Sign of Power See All Ends in Redline giving you the temporary damage buffs you currently gain from Inner Flame. In Blueline, it could be a targeted buff that is equivalent to a Redline captain using 2 arms, where your target gains a stronger buff and the rest of your group gains a slightly lesser buff. It seems like he's thinking about making See All Ends into a group buff in Blueline, and in Redline a self-damage buff. Interesting. We'll see where this skill ends up. Staff Strike and Staff Sweep, which are your melee skills where you hit people with your staff and your sword. On Mahal says, I'm open to further discussion regarding these 2 skills. I appreciate the commentary already provided for these, but frankly I still feel a bit mixed about having 2 melee only skills, which primarily improve your DPS output. Power and Ring of Fire also encourage playing within melee range, so these aren't the only melee oddballs. but I don't want LMs to feel forced into melee range due to the effects from these skills. There's not really a need for melee skills as a lore master. You shouldn't really have to be close and hitting your targets with melee skills. Just if I were in charge, I would just remove these skills and instead apply their buffs elsewhere. So for Light of Hope, which is one of your healing skills, Unmarked is saying we should probably increase the potency of this heal and potentially reinstate its morale cost. So Light of Hope turns into Beacon of Hope if you're a yellow line LM. It has an instant heal. It's also an heal AoE within 4 meters. You target someone who has allies nearby. It has initial healings and heals over time for 10 seconds. And Anmak Mahal says that this healing could probably be stronger. Wisdom of the Council. Reduce the cooldown of Wisdom to 3 minutes. Change the damage negation reflect to proc on all types of incoming damage. And reduce the buff duration to 10 seconds. Wisdom of the Council is currently 5 minutes cooldown, and whenever you pop this skill, you will restore 50% morale. It's a nice panic skill if you're getting low on Lore Master to pop for that big heal. And currently you gain a 1 minute duration where you can reflect a stun, and you reflect damage and can have a chance to negate damage. So he's suggesting to reduce this cooldown to 3 minutes and also change the duration to the reflect component and reduce it to about 10 seconds. And I think that's a pretty reasonable change for Wisdom of the Council. Inner Flame. Inner Flame is a somewhat needlessly complicated skill with 3 vectors for increasing the damage buff, trait set bonus, trait in the blue line, and tiering up over the course of the channel, despite the fact that its baseline effects are entirely defensive. We may want to shift some or all of the offensive weight off of this skill and into the redline trait tree. Possibly a skill combo with one of the cat pets, a skill like Sign of Power Seal Ends, or something else with at least a moderate cooldown. So Inner Flame is kind of, like he said, it's a complicated skill. You need a pet out to use it. And it's currently a channeled heal. You're just standing still, healing yourself. And like he said, you also get a damage buff by using this. And he's thinking about removing this and just having the damage buff be somewhere else, making Inner Flame completely a self-heal and defensive cooldown. Now we're going to take a look at the separate trait trees. The Ancient Master, which is the yellow line, which is your main debuffing line. Bane Flare. Bane Flare would be granted by specializing in this tree and would thus be unavailable to blue or red line specialized LMs. So Bane Flare currently is a really strong max 9 targets, 10 meter radius, 15-second days with a 1 minute cooldown. It is one of the strongest tools that an LM can have. And basically when you use Bane Flare, throw a light up in the air, boom, and the target nearby gets dazed for 15 seconds and can only be broken after 7 seconds on damage. So the suggested change is locking Bane Flare behind yellow only. You can't get Bane Flare in red or blue. Good change in my opinion. Insult to Injury. Insult to Injury would likely be removed. It adds needless clutter and does not meaningfully impact your damage or your ability to support your allies. So Insult to Injury is a passive effect in yellow line that you gain. Burning Embers will deal bonus damage to stunned targets. And yes, I agree, this can easily be removed. Stormlore trait. The lightning damage here will very likely move over to the red tree. So if you look at the Stormlore trait, putting more points into this will increase your lightning type damage. And I also agree this can easily just be moved to the red line trait, not really needed for yellow LM. Fire and Frostlore. Fire and Frostlore would become trait set bonuses and thus only available to lore masters specialized in the Ancient Master trait tree. These could even potentially become effects applied by Wizard's Fire or Wizard's Frost, since those skills already have no cooldown and will cause a mob to enter combat. Of course, that may be undesirable only because the base Wizard's Fire Frost deal damage, making it impossible to safely apply and spread these debuffs to a group of massed, rooted, feared mobs. So Fire and Frostlore would become trait set bonuses. That would be fine, putting them as a set bonus. but I don't think you need to change how they're applied. Fire and Frost Lore being applied like skills is just fine, and being spread by Wind Lore. I don't think the Wizard's Fire and Wizard's Frost need to be brought into this. Just keep Fire and Frost Lore the way it is. Playing with fire and out in the cold. In addition to rebalancing the specific bonuses applied by each of these traits, I propose making the combo happen only once on the first instant of you using lightning, fire or frost against a target after fire lore or frost lore is applied. This would also likely mean air lore no longer triggers this combo. Overall, this would mean you have to think critically about which skills you use directly following the application / spreading of lores. But conversely, that you have more control over the debuff than just ending up with the frost effect from air lore basically all the time. And instead, you apply fire lore, you apply frost lore, and then wind lore will spread the debuffs to nearby targets. And of course, wind lore will also proc one of the playing with fire or out in the cold. And the suggested change is that wind lore will no longer affect these, but instead, after you apply fire lore and frost lore, then these would be reworked, and you would have to think about which you use, because the first one you use after putting lores on targets would be the debuff that would be applied to the target. Currently, the way it works is whenever you use a fire attack, the debuff will shift. If you use a frost attack, it will shift, and like it keeps constantly shifting depending on the skills you use. So instead, what it's trying to do is fire and frost lore applied to the target, and then whichever skill you use first to proc an effect, that's the effect that will stay on the target, and it will no longer constantly change depending on your next attacks following your initial. Meaning that you add some more thinking to the LM after you apply lores. Which debuff would you like applied to those targets? Pleasant Breeze. The trait for Pleasant Breeze would switch places with Beacon of Hope, making the Light of Hope, Beacon of Hope change a choice for the player, and making Pleasant Breeze exclusive to Yellow Line. Pleasant Breeze would have an increased potency and cooldown, and would no longer interact with Gust of Wind in any way. So Pleasant Breeze in the bottom right would see a potency increase and cooldown increase, and would switch places with Beacon of Hope. So Pleasant Breeze would be locked in yellow, being the second set bonus, and Beacon of Hope would be tradable in Yellow Line. Air Lore would drop from being a permanent toggled to a 20-second duration effect with a 90-second cooldown, but the proc chance would increase from 5% to 50%, more than doubling the skill's overall potency, while making it much more valuable to you as a reactive defensive skill. Interesting. So looking at Air Lore currently the way it works, let's get a Raven out here. So Air Lore is currently a toggle skill that you put on a target. My Raven now has the Air Lore effect, where you have a 5% chance to negate 15% damage, and you also reflect 34% of the damage. So the suggested change here is to make the cooldown 90 seconds, so a minute and a half, and the duration, instead of being permanent, it'll be a 20-second duration, but basically become a 50% chance to negate 15% damage, making it a cooldown you would throw on a tank or someone, DPS or something, if they're taking a lot of damage. So they'll have a 20-second window where they negate 15% damage and reflect damage. So I think a nice change, because it's kind of annoying if you get out of range, you have to reapply Air Lore, and you always just chuck it on the tank, which is kind of boring gameplay. But I think the suggested change to Air Lore is a good one. Advanced Knowledge of Cures. This trait will be obsolete with the base skill having no induction, but this trait may stick around to apply an extra effect to Knowledge of Cures, like a small heal for each negative effect removed, or always applying an extra cleanse to yourself. Like we saw before, Knowledge of Cures is now going to be instant in any line, any spec. You can use it on the move, but it might see a trait in Yellow Line where it will have an additional effect, but overall the Knowledge of Cures will be the same in any line. Force of Will, consider this one slightly subject to change depending on your core debuffing skills in Yellow Line. Currently what Force of Will does is increasing the duration of the following debuffs: Fire Lore, Frost Lore, Sign of Power, and Ancient Craft. It also increases the amount of targets you have with Ancient Master for your Fire and Frost lore effects. So this might only slightly change depending on what the core debuffing skills will end up being in Yellow Line, so no major change to this trait. Warding Knowledge and the Ancient Master. The Ancient Master would move up in the skill tree and would no longer be the capstone skill, but it would be otherwise unchanged. Taking its place would be Warding Knowledge. Warding Knowledge would become a defensive skill, benefiting your allies when standing in its area, rather than debuffing the enemies. Tentatively, Warding Knowledge would have something like a 10-second duration, a 2-minute 30-second cooldown, and would apply a 30% incoming damage effect, reducing the incoming damage by a true 30%. So this is another suggested change I like a lot. Ancient Master being moved up in the trait line, so it's no longer a capstone skill. Instead, the skill Warding Knowledge will change and become a capstone skill in yellow. The way Warding Knowledge currently works is kind of like Sticky Tar, where it has a 40-second duration, 45-second cooldowns, so pretty much 100% uptime. It does increase tactical damage currently, so please look at tactical classes, rune-keepers, lore masters, minstrels. I think all those classes might need a slight damage buff with all these changes happening where they don't get as much incoming damage as before. Especially rune-keepers who also lose the fire debuffs on the targets. But the way it currently works, Warding Knowledge, you drop it on the ground, and it gives the mobs in the square increased miss chance and more incoming tactical damage. So basically, the suggested change is Warding Knowledge becomes a capstone skill, so you can only have it in Yellow Line, and it'll still be this square that we see here. Instead of debuffing the enemies, it'll instead buff your allies within this square. So the suggested change is making the cooldown 2 minutes 30 seconds and like a 10-second duration, where all damage to the players. So let's say, alright, we're gonna take a lot of damage now. Warding Knowledge going down, all the allies within this square will then take 30% less damage. If you're getting hit for 1 million, you would instead get hit for 700,000. So a really strong defensive buff, really nice fun cooldown to know when to use it. So it could potentially just be dropped on a tank if the tank is taking a lot of damage. It can be dropped on a group. It can also be like placed strategically, hitting the group and the tank. So I am fully behind this change. Great idea for Warding Knowledge. Warding Knowledge being a strong defensive cooldown on a longer sounds like a great idea to me. Now over to Master of Nature's Fury. So Redline Lore Master. Sticky Gourd. Sticky Gourd would be granted by specializing in this tree and would no longer be accessible to lore masters specialized in blue or yellow. So Sticky Gourd would become a red line only trait. No longer could you get it as yellow or blue lore master. Ring of Fire. Ring of Fire loses its induction and is placed on the ground in front of you like Tar or Warding Lore, rather than on your target. The actual ring would no longer double in size at max trait rank, but would apply a potential dot effects to enemies that pass through it. So the Ring of Fire effect, which currently needs a valid target, would instead just drop in front of you like Warding Knowledge or Sticky Tar, and if enemies pass through it, they would receive a dot. Nature's Fury. Nature's Fury would deal more damage, and it may function better as a ground targeted skill rather than an effect on your current target. The upside being that ground targeted skills would give you a greater control over its position and would always persist for the full duration, as opposed to disappearing when your target dies, as it currently does, but carries the downside of no longer moving with your target and requiring time to manually targeting the skill. So a suggested change for Nature's Fury as well to become a targeted skill. This would make the effects apply for the full duration and not disappear when your target dies, giving you more value for the duration, and of course would hit more targets as well. Liquid Fire. This trait would make improved Sticky Gourd deal more damage and apply the Sticky Tar debuff to enemies hit. So this trait would make improved sticky gourd deal more damage. Sticky gourd would deal more damage, so it's going to be a puddle. So basically, improved sticky gourd will deal more damage and also give the sticky tar debuff to the targets, which would reduce their tactical mitigations. So sticky gourd will also become a tactical mitigation debuff in Redline, so kind of making Loremaster good for debuffing tactical mitigations. And Go to War. Reduce cooldown to at least 3 minutes and change the stun into a knockdown. It may still need a little base damage upward nudge as well. So currently the cooldown of Ents Go to War is 5 minutes. He's suggesting a 3-minute cooldown and a slight damage bump, and changing this stun to a knockdown. And finally we have Blue Line, Keeper of Animals. Keep in mind the proposals below are made with an eye towards Blue Line LM becoming an alternative option of the Red Line captains in-group. They won't have exactly the same kits of course, but where effects share the same name, assume those are mutually exclusive with similarly named Red Captain effects. So Almak Mahal is saying Sign of Power See All Ends. A new trait in Blue Line would cause Sign of Power See All Ends to give your targeted ally a 2 arms effect, with the rest of your group getting the usual less potent version. So he's suggesting that Blue Line LM, Sign of Power See All Ends, you target your ally, apply this buff to your ally, they get the 2 arms effect, and your other allies get a lesser version of that. Peerless Wisdom. This trait's effect would be replaced by one which causes your pet's debuffing skills to give your fellowship the Red Captain Inspire effects. Basically, he would change this trait, second set bonus in Blue Line, to instead having your pets apply Inspire buffs to your allies. Raven's Protection. This trait's effect would be replaced by one which causes your Raven's flanks to apply Relentless Assault to your group. Basically giving you the Red Line Relentless Assault buff to your group. Eagle's Nobility. A new trait. This would allow your eagle to place a hotspot with identical effects to a captain's banner of war. Catmint. The Raven effect would no longer impact Benediction of Raven. These effects overall needs to be rebalanced to have more similar values to one another. Sure. Alright, that was a forum post. A lot to take in here. I'll give my my brief thoughts of what I've seen here. There's one thing I'm gonna strongly disagree with here. That's the blue LM becoming quote-unquote Red Captain. I don't think there's a need for that. I don't think lore masters would enjoy that gameplay. If you're gonna play that way, you just play Red Captain, you know? I think blue should become a utility line for sure. Red for DPS, yellow for support. Lore masters should be fine with that. Like yellow is the core lore master role, and red line could be made stronger. And we don't really need a third line for lore master in my opinion. So I strongly disagree with the blue LM becoming a support spec like a Red Captain. I don't think there's really a need for that. Especially if you're just gonna like copy the way blue LM is gonna be, like just kind of a copy of Red Captain. I don't like that. So in my opinion, blue line should be a passive trait. Yellow and red should be the traits you can go as a lore master. When it comes to the pets, I don't think it looks too bad. Of course, we'll have to wait to see the final result. 2-minute cooldown on the pets. Maybe it's a bit long. I mean, you could easily make it a 1-minute cooldown on the pets. Like, you're still not gonna rush them through your pets. But I don't see the need for like a 2-minute cooldown. What's the point of needing such a long cooldown? But a 1-minute cooldown, and I think it will be fine. Like the changes to the pets and the identities I liked. Looked pretty good. But I do think the cooldown could be a minute and it'll be fine. I like the way damage, how they will have different identities. I should mention there needs to be some information about this, you know, in the traits, so people know. And when it comes to the, like overall, I liked pretty much all of the skill changes. But just keep in mind, we're losing a lot of fire mitigation debuffs. There needs to be compensation for red lore master, for red rune-keeper. That's really important. Don't leave them hanging. And we're also losing the warning knowledge incoming tactical damage debuff. So another debuff to tactical classes. So make sure if you go through with all these changes, you need to balance the tactical DPS classes as well, and the classes using fire damage. But overall, I think the skill changes and the trait changes looked fine. Don't really have any big problems with that. But my big, call it a pet peeve with this, with these suggested changes, the blue line, quote unquote, red captain role, I don't like. I don't think it fits with the lore master role. So honestly, the lore master changes seemed fine overall, but I really think blue line could see becoming a passive trait line. Just give Murder of Crows to red LM, you know, make all this stuff passive, and I think we would have a better time with lore master. I like the yellow changes, I like the red changes, but I don't like the blue changes that much. So those are my thoughts. Let me know in the comments what people think. I'm quite interested to see what the community thinks of the suggested changes. Do you think blue line is a good idea, becoming like a red captain role? I don't, but I'm interested to hear people's arguments. Let me know in the comments. Appreciate people watching. Have a good day. A big thank you to Driddle Dirty Toes for supporting me through my Ko-fi website. Hey! Hey you! Yeah you! What do you want? You enjoy my content and you want to support me? Fine, I'll show you how you can do it. I would really appreciate if you like the video and subscribe to my channel. You can also support me through my Ko-fi homepage. If you're playing or looking to play Lord of the Rings online, there is one place you need to be. The Ghyniverse is a Discord server created for the community of the players of Lord of the Rings Online. The server is getting close to 7,000 members, and in this server you'll find tons of helpful information. There's monthly giveaways, easy access to patch notes, you can keep up with my YouTube videos, my streams. If you're a streamer, you can ask for the streamer role and you can announce your streams in the other stream channel. There are discussion channels for pretty much everything, every class, monster players. But the best thing about this server is probably the Gearing Resources tab, where you can find anything from trait lines for every class, every build. There are stat goals, where you can find out what stats you should aim for on your characters. Really helpful information about drop rates from instances, as well as screenshot from all the new loot that appears in the game. If you enjoy LOTRO, you should definitely consider joining this server, and hopefully I'll see you in Middle Earth. If you were part of the Ghyniverse already, you might have noticed that another tab appeared at the top, the LFF server. This server is a brand new server that I created, the LFF Ghyniverse. In this server, you can select which servers you want to keep up with, and once you select your server, say you select Arkenstone, you will see the LFF, the kinship advertisement, looking for kinship and trade channels, and there's also voice channels if people want to use those. The LFF channel is basically a looking for fellowship channel where people can post if they need players for the runs, and this way people don't have to be logged into the game to see the chat. They can just instead get a notification on their Discord. There's also a kinship advertisement page where kins can post their kinship advertisement and have people join their kins, and you can also post in the looking for kinship chat if you're looking for a kinship, but make sure to take a look in the kinship advertisement first and look through all the kin to find a suitable kin for you. There's also a trade channel if people want to buy or sell stuff that you can use. Hopefully you'll consider joining this server to bring the community even more together, not just in the game, but also outside of the game.